In 1987, Sega created a JRPG to compete with the popular Dragon Quest. Thus, Phantasy Star Online came out for the Sega Master System. It did a lot to stand out. For one, it had animated enemies when basically no other RPGs did that. The artwork in general also received a lot of praise. It had a unique flavor with science fiction elements built in from the ground up rather than as a surprise towards the end. The cartridge was also compatible with the Japan-only FM sound chip, giving the game an unusually good soundtrack. The only problem it had was that the hardware involved with the whole thing made it the most expensive console game on the market, driving some of its potential buyers away. In 1989, Sega made a sequel for the Genesis. Phantasy Star 2 had a better combat engine than its predecessor, but it became most famous for its story. It explored the consequences of blind faith in one's society despite even the most obvious signs that it isn't working, as well as the way people ignore the suffering of those on the edges. But no one talks about any of that because Nay, a member of your party, died about halfway through the game. Hello there, Final Fantasy VII fans, you'll find a good home here. Phantasy Star 2 made it onto more than one best game of all time list, though by today's standards, its game design problems and tedious grind drag the game down. In 1990, a new development team presented the third game of the series. It was a huge multi-branching story arc on a cartridge much too small to handle it, and this wasn't the only problem by any means. The elaborate animations of earlier games were gone, the battle system was simplified in a bad way, and it just didn't have the character of earlier games. This was the first Phantasy Star game I played, by the way, and I was stubborn enough to complete all 4 plot branches. I'm not sure what was wrong with me. Sega brought back the main developers for Phantasy Star 2 to work on a game that would conclude the series. The intention was to produce this game for the Sega CD, and also make a side story game for the Genesis. But since the Sega CD turned out to be kind of a flop, they moved all of the team's efforts to the Genesis to make the final game there. And in 1993, Sega produced this. God damn. I was tempted to end the video right there, but I think it'll take a lot more than just a one-word exclamation to do Phantasy Star 4 justice. My intention is to play through this game, show off everything I can, explain tie-ins to previous games, and bring forward every obscure bit of information I can find. I hope you'll join me as I explore my favorite game of its generation. To start off, the society that the introduction talks about, in many ways it is as good as described, however, the full truth is a lot more complicated. I get the impression that what they're talking about here is what people were able to piece together at the time the story begins. To give you an idea, the very first thing that happens in Phantasy Star 1 is that the main character's brother gets killed by robot cops. And Phantasy Star 1 was the more optimistic game of the first two. We're going to have plenty of opportunities to go back and talk about some of the things that happened in the early games because Phantasy Star 4 has a lot of call-outs. But for now, let's get things started, make a new file, and see what the game has to say. Time to meet our starting pair of characters, Alice and Chaz. Chaz was originally supposed to start the game as a veteran, but also be level 1, and those things did not mesh together. So, he's a rookie now. Although this is not the first job he's ever been on, just he was mostly observing, watch and learn, shadowing Alice sort of thing. Alice has a similar name to the main character of Phantasy Star 1, just spelled differently, but that's a coincidence. In the Japanese version, her name was Lila. And we've already learned a couple of things. For example, Chaz is curious and likes to learn things, which is a very important quality to have in a Phantasy Star game. Whereas Alice is all business and not all that interested in book learning, although she is not stupid by any measure. This little bit of introduction talks about the increase of monsters as one of the big problems, but that's a solvable thing by opportunistic people with weapons. We're going to see some more serious things in short order. When our characters get separated, we control Chaz, so main character confirmed. Let's take a look at his status. You get character portraits here that you cannot see any other way. Right now he doesn't have any notable skills. And we're also going to show off the talk command. At any time you can use this to find out what you're supposed to do next. Although in this case it's called mumble because Chaz is alone, anytime he's with at least one other person the command is talk instead. And if you've ever returned to a game after being away from a while, you'll know how valuable that sort of thing can be. In general, if the location they're supposed to go to is somewhere on the overworld map, they'll say in which direction it is and what they're trying to do. It's pretty nice. And the makers of the game were conscientious about adding a separate talk dialogue or monologue to every story trigger in the game. It's pretty neat. Also, as you saw, if you check the area ahead of you when nothing is there, the character at the front of the party says something, and that's a different phrase for every character in the game. It's worth noting that the town we're at right now, Piata, is the town of learning. That's pretty much it. This is the biggest university there is on Motavia, as far as I know. And considering that this place is not huge or incredibly impressive, you can get a decent idea of where civilization is at right now. They have books and telescopes and desks, and that's about as complicated as things get. And these guys are trying to body block me and stop me from reading what's on the bookshelf. They're doing a pretty good job. And if you've played previous Phantasy Star games, you know exactly how likely it is that the characters will be engaging in interplanetary travel, which is 100% probability. Come on, out of the way. Gotcha. Before we talk to the principal and find out what we're going to do, we're going to explore and do everything else we possibly can. Chaz is not about looting people's houses. If it's a cabinet or a dresser that belongs to someone else, he will not open it. And here are problems that a sword will not solve. This takes investigation. I like having that kind of problem introduced to a game, something that does not have an immediately obvious solution. It kind of piques a sense of mystery, in my opinion. And here's one of the first callbacks to previous games. That professor that he's referring to was in Phantasy Star 1 and was an expert in space travel. He knew how to design and create spaceships and was pretty much the only person who could do that. Wait, the principal has the authority to seal everyone in the town? How much power does that guy have? While Alice is correct that complaining is not going to accomplish anything, I'm not sure how exactly you're going to fix the desert asserting itself over the entire planet. Now this is a detail that I did not know about. If it's explained in Phantasy Star 2, I didn't notice, but that helps explain why things are so unstable right now. Well, I say right now, but that happened about 1,000 years ago. It probably had some nasty long-term effects, though. Also, I'm having some trouble looking at this desk because this game has a bit of a movement navigational aid, which is usually helpful. If you walk into a corner or something else with an open space adjacent to where you're walking, your character will sort of autocorrect. It'll move one tile to the side and keep going in the direction you're pressing. Which is nice in some places, but when you're trying to examine an object that's 1 tile by 2 tiles, it can be a little annoying. I'd be upset too. Also, someone we talked to previously said that people brought an unusual parcel in here, and, well, at about the same time the monsters started showing up. Oh, I wouldn't say that if I were you, kid. In a setting that's even a little bit dark, when a kid says that, there's a good chance they're doomed. And Phantasy Star, as a series, is reasonably dark. That said, that kid is perfectly okay, but just a warning. So he doesn't say what kind of meteorological instruments those are, but I think that's about as high-tech as we're going to find around here. And it seems that no matter what happens, no matter what civilization might be like, university students are like that. I gotta say, the people in town have a pretty good beat on what's going on. Although it isn't terribly difficult to connect the research goings on and the appearance of monsters, it's a little unusual for video game NPCs to pick up on that sort of thing. Oh, this should be fun. Walking in circles around a little chair thing, huh? Right, that explains it. I would probably do the same thing in his place. Although, if I was in university, I'd have at least a couple of non-school books, I gotta say. This is the only university you can visit, and possibly the only big university on the planet, and the students are still lazy and don't do any work. They are not taking it seriously whatsoever. I can't tell whether this is exaggerated or just realistic. Well, now that we've explored the town and possibly broken a couple of laws, we can go back and talk to the principal. And I have to give the developers some credit. A lazier developer might have stopped you from leaving the building by having Alice say, "Hey, we need to talk to the principal. We're here for a job." But no, they let you go out, and they have NPC text specifically for if you decide to do that. My assumptions. Although it's not completely off the mark. One of our hunters is a guy, and he's reasonably dependable. I like how Alice doesn't take Chaz completely seriously, but she'll stand up for him in front of anyone else. That doesn't seem like the sort of creature you find in nature. Oh, I'm sure Alice has a reputation for dealing with shady things discreetly. That doesn't seem like a face of innocence to me. Now this conversation kind of assumes that you went and talked to the principal right away. I think it'd be interesting if the talk with the principal or the talk right afterward was a little bit different if you went outside and conversed with people, because it seems like everyone in town knows what's going on. Despite the principal's calls for discretion, the genie is out of the bottle, or the cat is out of the bag, or however you want to say it. Meet our third party member. He's a researcher, so in combat he's nothing special right now. Also, I think the translation is a little shaky. That whole, the place that has been called the Sacred Valley of Life thing doesn't strike me as the sort of phrase a native English speaker would say. And there's some evidence of this throughout the story. It's here and there. But it's not so bad that it doesn't convey its ideas in an understandable way, so I'm willing to forgive it. Yeah, Han is not a fighter. Here we go. This is the start of a long and extremely one-sided financial relationship. And Alice is right to ask for money for this, because Han joining the party turns this extermination mission into an extermination plus escort mission. The guy cannot handle himself on his own. He has a couple of support skills, but nothing directly offensive. And he cannot take hits very well. Oh, welcome to the battle interface. Alice has a good set of skills: direct offense, stat buffs, and single target attacks. And the latter is important because her normal attack hits the entire enemy party. Like so. That's Chaz's starting utility skill. As you can see, it stops the enemy from moving, but it's not very reliable, so this is the only time in the entire game that you'll probably see me use it. This dungeon is not huge, and that makes sense, not just because it's the first dungeon in the game, but because it's a university basement. what do you expect? You may also have noticed that Chaz is dual wielding. That is a thing people can do with any weapon they can equip. Han could use 2 knives if he wanted to, but he doesn't hit very hard anyway, so it's better for him to have a shield in one hand. In fact, it might be better for him to have a shield in each hand. Yeah, you can dual shield, and sometimes it is the best move. We also have macros. This can be used for auto-battling easy encounters like so, and you can set them yourself for custom auto-battle sequences if you have certain characters where what you want them to do is a no-brainer. And they have additional functions to that as well, which we'll talk about as the game progresses. And as usual, it's very important to explore all of the side passages and dead ends that you can. I think that's universal in JRPGs. Oh, hello. You got me. We also got our first boss battle. This is nothing too special, but there is something to consider. It generates a monster every turn, and if it fills the screen, which is to say there's 3 monsters total when the boss's turn comes up, the boss will attack instead, and that is not optimal for us. So the plan is simple. Chaz will control the adds. Han will try to decrease the enemy's attack power but fail because this is not Shin Megami Tensei. Putting debuffs on enemies is not reliable or optimal, which is a bit of a shame, but the game design is what it is. Using buffs on yourself is not a bad idea, although I believe that you can only apply them once. They don't stack on themselves. So you can have a defense buff, a speed buff, but not 2 speed buffs, for example. I can only assume that this was purposely designed so that if you use all of Alice's vortexes on the boss will die. It's just set up too perfectly. And it's true, Alice did pretty much all the damage to the boss right there. Well, yes. Yes, they are. The only question is whether they're doing that on purpose, because it seems like these things are kind of functioning on their own. These kinds of capsules appeared in Phantasy Star 2 as well, and I will say that an improvement of Phantasy Star 4 is when you walk up to these and examine it, the characters will mention that something is weird about these, because in Phantasy Star 2, the character said, "Oh, there's nothing unusual here," same as if you would expect an empty space. Then again, maybe they're more commonplace in that setting, although in context given by that game I kinda doubt it. From now on I'm going to skip any random encounters that don't show off anything new or interesting. Well, let's report our success to the principal and gently inquire as to the situation. Now, why would that be? Actually, that's not the first question I should ask. The first question I would ask is, how could this person expect our characters to not notice those monster breeding containers nor have any questions about them? Because if you assume something like that, you'll have a hardened mercenary roughing you up for information like so. For a principal and professor, this guy doesn't seem terribly bright. Why would they bring back monster breeding capsules? The fact that he described them as such means that the people involved knew what those things are, and they still brought them back to the university instead of doing almost anything else that would be a better idea. But as for the banning entry to Birth Valley, that seems like a good move considering that your previous team disappeared. You don't want any accidents. Although I will say sending a rescue team or a scout team may have been a good idea. Now, the claim of that fake magician seemed a little bit odd to me, because Zio here clearly does have actual powers and rather strong ones. Also, this is a flashback. The first time I played the game, it took me a while to figure out that this black and white stuff wasn't happening as they talked, and that guy turned to stone was just Zio showing off some random guy he victimized. And it sounds like that to me, too. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Wow, Han got extorted for money twice in one session. That Alice is impressive. She knows exactly how far she can push that. Also, when she does that sort of shenanigan to Han, you actually get the amount of money Alice asked for. You might have noticed that the first time that happened and she asked for 100 meseta, my bank total went from 500 to 600. And that's the case every time Alice squeezes some more money out of Han here. And now we finally have a place to go, but we've done a fair amount here. I'm gonna take some time to maybe buy a couple of healing items and use the inn. And I think that's it for now. So thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.